All right, so thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Elite Development Podcast. Today, I'm sitting down with Robin Spiers of Robin Spiers and Associates. And Robin, thanks again for coming in and doing this today.
Yeah, my pleasure, Ken.
So, just to give us a start, do you think you could give a little bit of background, just who you are, what brought you to where you are today, and then a little bit about what you do today as well?
Sure. Well, I guess previously, before real estate, I was a tennis professional. Um, you probably would have never heard of me unless you were actually involved in tennis somehow. I was among the top in the nation, and I played some of the entry level of the professional ranks. Um, so, back then we used to call them satellites and challengers, and now I think they're called futures. But I used to play all the money tournaments around Canada and the US, and I would play the satellites and played some challengers as well. But after I was done playing tennis, I did some coaching as well. But then I got into real estate in 2003. And for the last 17 years, I've been a realtor here in Calgary.
All right, so just going back to tennis, like when did you start playing when you were growing up?
Well, I started when I was 5 or 6 years old, and I guess I left that part out. So I played in Calgary up until about 14 or 15, and then Tennis Canada recruited me to a regional training center that they had in Vancouver, and they were grooming us for the pros or NCAAs. And after I finished high school, I went the NCAA route. I played college tennis for 4 years down in the NCAAs and went to Texas. And then after I finished down there, that's when I did more playing into the pros and also some coaching on the side as well. Because when you're trying to make it on the tour, there's not a lot of money, so you're trying to accumulate points. And if you get more points and get the higher rankings, then you get into the money tournaments. So the best money tournaments were like the ones that had no ATP points, and then the ATP tournaments were the ones that you were trying to collect points. But yeah, I started when I was 5 or 6. And then by the time I was a teenager, I was playing pretty seriously, and then all through university as well.
Okay, so I can imagine like when you're getting into those sort of early level pro tournaments and you're trying to balance working and making money on top of preparing, like that kind of turns into a pretty hectic schedule. Can you give me a bit about like what your average week would look like when you're at that level?
Yeah, I was well, before I went to university, I was playing from about 4 to 7 p.m. every day of the week, except for Saturday and Sunday, where there was mostly tournaments, or we had those a day or two off on the weekend. So it's actually on the court from 4 to 7 from Monday through Friday. 7 o'clock, we usually had 7 to 8:30. We had fitness training. So we were probably doing that's 15 hours a week on court, and about another 7 to 10 off the court, on our fitness. Some of it was sports specific, some of it was just general fitness. But that's what the week would look like when I was in high school training with Tennis Canada. And then after, like in university, they had us make sure we take all our courses in the morning because from about 1 to 4, there was on-court training. And funny enough, in college, we had to do our own fitness training. So I did my own stuff or did other things, stuff that I remembered because when I was training with Tennis Canada, we had 2 tennis coaches, 1 fitness trainer, and even a sports psychologist, all helping the 16 of us that were at that regional training center.
Wow.
From Western Canada.
You had all of that staff sort of backing you guys up, but then you didn't have that anymore once you reached NCAA.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I remember for about a semester or so, I had a little bit of trouble because I was used to somebody standing over me with a whip, directing me. So I had to self-motivate, which was, didn't come right away. It was a bit of a learning process because, I'd gotten used to one way and now I was put into a situation. And funny enough, that first year, the coach was that type of coach. He just kind of let you do it. He didn't stand over you or, kind of not make you do it because there was never any chore getting me to do stuff. But I guess there was a little bit of if no one's looking at you, sometimes we had the tendency to goof off and not get the work done. So
Yeah.
it took about a semester to kind of realize that I had to get serious. Otherwise I was wasting my time, because as a professional athlete, you've got a very short shelf life.
Yeah, of course. If you're not taking it seriously at the top level, then, there's going to be someone right underneath you that's looking to take your spot, right? So
Absolutely.
coming back to when you were playing in high school. So by the sounds of it, it was about 25 hours a week of training with the on-court stuff as well as the fitness training, on top of obviously going to school, getting an education, and all of that. I know a lot of high school kids nowadays, and I would even include myself when I was in high school in that category. I had trouble just balancing going to school. How did you manage working 25 hours a week on the court and fitness training on top of the regular load of just being a teenager too?
Well, you have to make some sacrifices, I guess. Before I went and started training with Tennis Canada, my parents and I, we sat down as a family, and obviously my parents were, if I was going to move away from home at 14 or 15 years old, they basically said, this is a serious commitment. This isn't just a holiday. If we're going to give up our son, mind you, I guess the two before me, they were so bad, maybe they didn't mind giving me up. Thought that I was like, no, just kidding. But no, I mean, if at the end of the day, you have to make some sacrifices, because like you say, 25 hours a week, in some cases, that's almost a full-time job for people. But definitely more hours than a part-time job.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you had to be very good with allocating time to stuff. You had to get to sleep, make sure you got the proper sleep, because as a teenager, you need more sleep than the average person. So it's a huge lesson in time management. And, there's not really any, I mean, yes, people can help you with that, but at the end of the day, you're in control of that. You can't have someone standing next to you 24/7, making sure that you're doing all the things you need to do. You've got to be fairly disciplined with your time management.
Of course, you've got to have people there to kind of help guide you along the way. But when it all comes down to it, it really comes down to what you're willing to do and what you're willing to put into it, right?
Yeah, and you made a very good comment before. If you're not prepared to do it, go all over the world. Like, I mean, Russians have always been. I like to use Russia as an example, and I mean, this was the case. I knew some people that defected back in the '80s when that was a common occurrence back then. But you had the choice. You could play for country and be treated like royalty and get to see the world and travel and play the sport that you love, or you could go work in a factory. I mean, it's not as dire consequences here in North America or Canada. We've all got a fairly good standard of living, but you've got to realize that you're going to be up against yes, in your city, you might be the best in your city, or you might be the best in your province, or even the best in your country. But there's a lot of countries that are, they've got to, when you've got athletes choosing between, I could go work in a factory and die when I'm 40 because of the work conditions, or I could try to become the best athlete in the world. That's a huge motivator for some of these athletes from other countries. So I like to call North Americans, for the most part, wimps in comparison to some of these other countries where, you really, really, you're up against these guys that are fighting for their lives. They can either have an athletic career or they can work in a factory. We don't have the same motivation in Canada or the US. I mean, you don't make it, you've probably got a decent education you can fall back onto. So to make it, you really, really have to be motivated, and it's about self-motivating. And I mean, if nothing else, none of this is rocket science. Learn what the best are doing and mirror it, and maybe even take it a step further. If you're not as talented as the next person, and the next person's putting in 20 hours a week, then you need to put in 30 or 40 hours a week. If
Yeah.
you want to be able, if you're not as talented, you know what I mean? Like, you got to be aware of your strengths and weaknesses. And if you've got weaknesses, then you've got to maybe put in some extra time compared to some of the other athletes. Hard work will always outwin talent, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like what you just said about, like, you've got to be aware of your own strengths and weaknesses. I think one of the most common things I see is, again, athletes that just kind of expect that things are going to happen for them. So if you can be aware of, maybe where you fall short compared to the competition, that gives you a little bit more of a clear objective, like through your training and through your practice, what you need to work on to make sure that you're giving yourself a leg up again over the people you're playing against, right?
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, well, my next question was going to be: do you have any tips or tricks that maybe worked for you when you were talking about self-motivating in university, when you didn't have that strict sort of guy standing over you with the whip, making sure you were doing anything?
I guess I've always liked to self-reflect, and I think, maybe because I was in a sport that was very individual, there wasn't much team aspect to it at all, except maybe down in the NCAA's, there's a team aspect to it. But I guess if you want results, you've got to have some self-reflection ability. And I guess I just reflected on where I was going. I didn't like where I was headed. I allowed myself to be influenced by some of the other guys on the team. Like I went down there with an attitude, coming out of a training center, like I was with Tennis Canada, to a party atmosphere and possibly, some of the guys were in their last year, so they weren't as serious. And I kind of let that influence me a little bit. And that's not like me. So it was very short lived, but then I kind of put the brakes on and said, wait a minute, this isn't what I want. And so regardless of what they thought of me or whatever, I decided this is what I want to be and this is what I want to do. I guess just reflected on where I was going. And I think that's always a good thing is, I love this saying, people always end up in the direction they're heading. So what direction are you heading in? And, if you kind of look back at that, and if you're unhappy with where you're heading, then some changes have to be made.
Yeah, I like what you said about regardless of what they thought of me, because I think that's something, again, that nowadays I see a ton is people just kind of succumbing to peer pressure, right? If the other guys on the team are going out drinking on Friday when you've got training Saturday morning, are you letting them influence you, and are you going along and sacrificing a quality training session? Or are you saying, no, you know what? I want to be the best. And if I'm going to be the best, that means I've got to be good to go tomorrow morning. And you're not caring as much about what they're looking at, but more caring about exactly the direction that you're going and where you're headed.
Absolutely. If you've got friends that are trying to bring you down, you might need some new friends. I think if your friends, it's important to communicate with your friends what your goals are. So if your friends understand that the fact that you might go out with them on a Friday night, but you might leave at 10 o'clock so you can get to bed and get good sleep so you can train the next morning, and you're drinking water, the right friends will be like, yeah, I'm going to party, but you know what? I'm not going to let my buddy Rob, and he told me he wants to be this, so I've got to do my part as his friend. If my friends kept saying, oh, come on, drink, this and that, I don't know if maybe you need some new friends, because seriously, if you're serious about what you want to do, then I think that your friends will support you. And I, that's maybe one area where I could say I learned, but, I wouldn't say too late, but, I'd say that I got caught up in that a little bit and then had to change things when I realized I didn't like the path I was heading down.
Yeah, I really like that, because obviously it's a tough thing, especially if they're people that you've known for any real amount of time. It's a tough thing to maybe have to sacrifice some friendships. But again, if you're serious about where you want to go, I completely agree. The people around you are going to be a massive part of that environment too.
Yeah, nothing about becoming a professional athlete is necessarily easy. And, I mentioned before about sacrifices. Well, that's one of the sacrifices is, maybe I didn't have as many friends as some people throughout my schooling and whatnot, but that was a choice I made, and I don't regret it. I've got some great friends now, and throughout my life. And again, the ones that are your real friends are going to support you, whatever you decide. They'll, if they're your true friends, they'll be very supportive about your goals and what you want to do as an athlete.
Yeah, and I think that's a key thing for people to remember, right? Is that if you have friends that maybe you do like them, but they are kind of trying to pressure you to stray away from what you're aiming for, stray away from, your best interests, then the chances are, even if you do like them in the moment, the chances are they're not the best long-term friends to keep in your network anyway.
Yeah, quite possibly.
And so another thing, like we were talking about in high school and likely moving into university, the physical preparation that you were doing, so the fitness training. I know we've talked a couple times in the past about your work with Rich Hesketh here in Calgary. And
Yep.
was that mostly in high school, or were you working with him through most of your pro career as well?
Actually, it's funny. I didn't start working with Rich until I was maybe 20, I want to say 23 or 24.
Okay.
But within a year and a half of working with Rich, I was um, rivaling anything I did when I was like 17, 18. I maybe lost some of it a little bit, or some aspects of it, of my fitness. Like he got me into, some of the like Olympic lifting and stuff that's, still relevant today.
Yeah.
Whereas, when we were training before with Tennis Canada, a lot of the training there wasn't a lot of Olympic lifting back then. And it was maybe a little bit more sports specific as opposed to sports specific and general.
Okay. And when you say you lost some of that, like, was that sort of through your university years when you were taking care of it yourself, it maybe faded a little bit and then Rich was able to get it back?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that through the university years, it's not that I wasn't fit. I was very fit. Just that edge, and kind of like the edge that anybody would be missing without some kind of a coach. So for me, if I was a professional tennis player, I would have a tennis coach specific to tennis, and I would have a fitness trainer specific to fitness, because two completely different things, but these two coaches would have to be able to work together, because obviously they'd have to be able to integrate things. But yeah, I think, everything nowadays is so specific that I don't see how a professional athlete could do it these days without having a coach specific to their sport, as well as a coach specific to their fitness.
I love that, because obviously being in my field, I think having someone in charge of your fitness levels, in charge of your strength and conditioning work is massively important. But that was going to be sort of what I wanted to dig into next. Is you said you started working with Rich when you were 23, having maybe lost a little bit of the edge from your earlier years. And like, what would you say the difference was that he was able to bring that you said rivaled anything you had done before?
Well, I don't know if I was uh, lacking. I'd say that it was that 10 to 15% that, is the difference between being, winning most of my matches in the nation in a year versus being at like 50% win or 60% win loss ratio. It was, that bit of difference made a huge difference. Like, the one thing that we did when I was training with Tennis Canada was regular fitness testing. Well, when I started working out with Rich, we did testing every 90 days, I think it was, to see how the previous 90 days were in comparison. And so always looking for improvement. And of course, when, you get any kind of competitor, when they see their previous numbers and they see the current numbers, and if there are any of them that aren't as good or better, then, you're like, holy, I got to work on this, or you're especially, or even something that you do really well. Like for me, I was always very fast around the court, and I never lost a match because of being tired or anything like that. That never existed for me. Not until post 30 years old. It was just that icing on the cake that brought me to new heights and new levels that I wasn't able to hit before. And I was able to, in fact, I was probably a better player. And then when I added the fitness on top of that, now I had the ability to do things. I could jump higher because of all the squats and Olympic lifting that we would do. I was faster. I had a faster off the start. So I had more explosive power. I had more muscle endurance. There was just maybe it was like icing on the cake times two. But it
Yeah.
was just, that was, and being a little bit more of a mature player by the time I was in my mid 20s, combined with amazing fitness, just, yeah, I think I was playing the best tennis of my life.
Yeah, I mean that makes a lot of sense because again, like the role I always feel that the strength and conditioning coach can come in and play for the athlete is more a guide than anything, right? It's not up to us as the coach to execute on the program for the athlete. That's obviously on them, as we talked about before, but it's just to give the athlete the proper tools, give them the ability to know what they have to do to be able to bring their game to the next level. And then it puts it back on you as the athlete to actually put that work in and see the results.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Um, it's such a crucial part of it, and I've been out of it now. 95 was the last official uh, pro tournament that I played, other than money tournaments around Canada. But it was also the year that after that year I stopped training for tennis. So I kind of decided that's it. I'm not trying to make it anymore.
Yeah.
So that's what, 25, what, 95? Yeah, I think 25 years ago. So I just assume that, and maybe you can tell me this, I just assume that nowadays people would have a separate coach for their sport and a separate coach for their fitness. Is that not the case?
There are definitely some athletes that are getting on that and starting to see the importance. But one thing that I know we run into in our field, unfortunately, a little too often, is people that think that training side is easy and they can kind of just take care of that stuff themselves. And for sure, there are athletes out there. You were talking about yourself being quite self-motivated. There are athletes out there that have no trouble going to the gym a few times a week, getting a good lift in, doing all that. But again, where I find that the struggle is just the expertise from the coach can just help you go from a good athlete to a great athlete. That extra 10-15% you were talking about that you were able to get from Rich, and what a difference that made for you. That's really the role that I find we can come in and play. Is athletes can be fit on their own, but we can bring them to that next level where they know exactly what they need to do on what days and how that can come back and translate specifically into their game.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that I got to admit, the training center that I trained with Tennis Canada back in the '80s must have been ahead of its time. There may be a handful of training centers around the world that had a separate. We had 4 coaches, like I said, 2 tennis coaches that trained us, 16 of us kids that were from across Western Canada. We had a psychologist and a personal trainer for us as well, and all working towards us. That was their full-time job, was working with us. So for the mid 80s or early to mid 80s, that's probably way ahead of its time. But nowadays I'd be shocked if or I guess the biggest recommendation I could make, based on when I look back across my experience, was having these individual specific coaches. Nowadays, I can't imagine that it's not main stage or the way it is. And if it isn't that way, it should be, because,
Yeah.
Nowadays it's kind of, it would be like, well, it's just, fitness is separate from, I think of my sport, tennis. So a tennis coach is good at coaching tennis,
Yeah.
but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to know jack bleep about fitness. And that's why I think you need something specific and sport specific. Obviously your fitness trainer has to understand to a certain degree your sport, or at least the biomechanics of how you need to be able to operate as an athlete, and then they can help you. But beyond that, they're the fitness professional. The tennis coach is not necessarily the fitness professional. And personally, I'm not interested in jacks of all trades. I like people who specialize.
Yeah, and I think that's where the key comes in, right? Is just like you said, people who specialize, being able to have the tennis professional there that can teach you absolutely anything and everything you need to know about the sport itself, but then being able to have the guy or girl there as well that can create the best athlete possible. And then when you have the best athlete possible and you have the best tennis player possible, that's going to be pretty tough to beat when you hit the court. That's one thing I always try to say, is that as the strength and conditioning coach, it's not my job to build the tennis player or build the hockey player or build, whatever individual I'm working with. It's my job to create the athlete. And then I send a better athlete back to the sport coach, and they create the players specific to that game.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And so when was it that you said you retired in 1995 from professional play? So how old were you then?
1995, I guess I would have been like 28 that year. I was born in 67, so 95 I was turning, wait a minute. Oh, doing the math wrong. So 97 would have been 30 years old. So yeah, I was turning 28 that year, but I was 27, I guess, 27 and a half.
Okay, so if you started at 5 or 6, that means you would have been playing 21 or 22 years in total for your career. So obviously, a wealth of experience over that kind of time. If you had one takeaway for a young athlete right now, whether a tennis player or playing any other sport that's trying to make it on the highest level, what should athletes be working on right now that's going to help put them over the edge and really separate themselves when they start coming into those professional ranks?
Find out what the best athlete, like if I was speaking to a tennis player, I'd say find out what the top tennis player is doing and start doing it. Like find out what they're eating, find out what their fitness regimen looks like, find out what their practice regimen looks like. And we don't need to, I guess if you want to set new standards, you could find out what the best is doing now and do more. And then, maybe you might set new standards and, maybe be the next best, whatever, Roger Federer, if it's a tennis player or whatever. But I think that, find out what the best in the world are doing and do it. I remember one of the best things I think Tennis Canada ever did was when they found out what are the best athletes at different ages doing, how many hours are they spending on the court, how many hours are they spending at fitness. And this is what you're competing with. And yeah, if you want to compete with it, then you got to match it. But if you want to be the best in the world, then you better be prepared to do more than what the best player in the world is doing at this point in time.
Yeah, that makes sense for sure. And correct me if you disagree, but personally, the way I always like to look at that is when you're looking at what the top guys are doing, obviously you can look at the specific number of hours, but what I always try to preach to people that I work with and really anyone else is that if you look at those number of hours, obviously you want to be cognizant of the age of the athlete. So, a 14-year-old kid trying to become a tennis professional probably shouldn't be doing exactly what Roger Federer or, the guys at the top are doing, but trying to create habits and trying to build systems that will allow them to do more than what he's doing right now and put dedicated practice into those hours as well. Because it's one thing to be on the court for, 25 hours a week, but if you don't really have a plan for how you're using those 25 hours a week and what they're doing to actually create the better tennis player, then personally I'd say that if you've got 15 hours of dedicated practice, you're probably going to get further than the guy that's doing 25 hours of just sort of random stuff.
Absolutely agree with you. In fact, you also proved another point that I made earlier in that that's why you surround yourself with the right coaches, because the coaches will ensure, if they're doing their job, they'll ensure that you're doing the right things based on your age, based on where you're at in your physical development and even fitness level, and even your stage as an athlete, in that specific sport. No point working on your slam dunk in basketball till you know how to dribble, right? You got to be able to walk before you can run. So again, all the more reason to surround yourself with the right professionals that can take you to where you want to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I think a key point that, again, some people might miss in this day of, having such view and such insight into what professional athletes are doing every day, thanks to the internet. I think a lot of kids will get caught up in seeing, this is what LeBron James is doing. So, this is what I've got to do too. not realizing that LeBron James isn't a 13-year-old kid walking into the gym for the first time. LeBron James is a 18-year veteran of the top basketball league in the world. So what he's doing is 30 years in the making, not what he was doing the first day he walked into the gym.
Yeah, I agree. And, when you're surrounding yourself with these coaches, I think it's also important to, like, if you are serious about becoming a professional athlete, I think it's important to think of yourself like a board of directors. Whoever the athlete is, this is, Joe Smith, who wants to become the best hockey player in the world, his coach, his fitness trainer, all the people that he has on his team, and it should be considered a team because in effect, you're a team, you're a board of directors, you guys should be talking about this on a regular basis as well and say, hey, where are we the last 90 days? What have we done in the last 90 days that have got us to winning the NHL Stanley Cup?
Yeah.
So what have we done to in my case, a tennis player, what have we done to, win our dream tournament of winning Wimbledon? Is what we accomplished in the last 90 days, is that a stepping stone in getting us towards that goal? And you know what? Drop any dead baggage. If you've got a coach that's not really into helping you, then you need a new coach. If the environment that you're in is not conducive for achieving that goal, get out of that environment. So, whatever that means, again, comes back to sacrifices. And if you really want this, then you've got to, I guess, just like any business would have to prepare a business plan to take to a bank to get a loan. I think it's a good undertaking to be serious about, okay, these are all the steps, what we've got to do along the way to win that Wimbledon title or that Stanley Cup title or the NBA championship, whatever you want to be the best at. Develop a roadmap on how to get there to your that golden ring, so to speak.
Yeah. What I really like there is that, again, I find people set external goals all the time. I want to play in the NHL. I want to win this tournament, win that tournament, whatever else that might be. But what I really like about what you said is it's focusing on what you're doing right now. So you've got your external goal. That might be far off in the distance, but you're not sitting there going, okay, I'm going to be the Wimbledon champion. You're sitting there saying, the last 90 days, has this been a step forward or a step backwards? If it's been a step backwards, how do we make sure that the next 90 days is a step forward? And if it was a step forward, how do we make sure we're making bigger strides in the next 90 days anyways?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right. So now I want to talk a little bit as well about your business that you're running right now and just sort of how that's developed over the last little while. So you started Robin Spiers and Associates in 2003, correct?
Yeah, that's right. I became a licensed realtor in 2003, originally to be just an investor. Wasn't really planning on being people's realtor. That kind of happened by accident. But yeah, 2003.
Okay. And that answers the first question I had, which is what brought you into real estate. But I think what I'm really interested in is this is something we've talked a little bit about before. And what have you taken from your career in sports? What have you taken from that into how you run your business now?
Oh my God. It is so transferable, the skills that I learned as an athlete growing up. In fact, I don't feel like there's any situation I couldn't be put in right now and thrive. Like, real estate, that's what I've been doing for the last 17 years. But whatever I was doing, I think I would excel at just because of what athletics taught me. And, you name it. I'll just put out some words: discipline, dedication, determination, tenacity, competitive spirit, just never say die. These are all amazing characteristics of a business person. God, if an employer was lucky to have an employee that exhibited all those things, well, they've got a fantastic employee. yeah, everything that I learned as an athlete was completely transferable to what I'm doing now, from the the self motivation to the competitiveness. It's a pretty competitive business that I'm in. Um, but I mean, yeah, I can't say it any other way other than it was just completely transferable. Every good attribute that I got out of being an athlete was completely transferable into business. I'd say, what's funny, the one thing that I'd say wasn't as great a transfer over, or at least I haven't felt that, is the competitive spirit, in the sense of I'm competitive with myself, but really it is a competitive business. But I think if you, at least in my business, if I look after my clients, I don't have to worry about the competition. So there is no competition in a way.
Yeah.
I just do a great job and look after my clients properly. But yeah, everything to do with being successful is completely transferable, I think, from being an athlete.
And do you think, like when you were playing and when you were kind of coming up through the Tennis Canada program and into the early level pro programs, did you have ideas of like your plan B, as far as like, if I don't make it as a tennis pro, what am I going to do? Or was it like, I'm going to make it, I'm going to win, that's that?
I think that, me and my family, we were never delusional about what the chances were. I mean, yes, I was identified at a young age as a good player, as a good athlete within Canada, but no one ever pointed to me and said, back in my day, oh, there's the next Jimmy Connors, or that's the next Bjorn Borg. So I think, who knows? Maybe that's why I didn't make it on the tour. But I got to a pretty high level at one point in my career. I was probably somewhere between top 500, top 1,000 in the world. So pretty good level still.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, no one's ever going to remember Robin Spiers unless, you can still find some stuff on Google about tennis. Now, when you Google my name, it's all real estate related.
Yeah.
But I mean, sorry, I've lost my train of thought. What was the question again?
No worries. And like, it's not at all framed in a negative way, right? But what I was asking is, when you were playing, if you had sort of a plan B in mind, like if I don't make it, am I going to fall back on this? Or was it just, I'm making it to the top and that's just how it's going to be?
That's why I chose to go the NCAA route through university. So that I have some education to fall back onto. Although, given what I'm doing now, I didn't necessarily need a university degree to be able to do it. Although it doesn't hurt having post secondary education as something to fall back on, because I think a very small percentage of people make it as a professional athlete. So you really should have a backup plan, because if you're like most people, you won't make it as a pro athlete. And so, I wouldn't, there was a point in time, I want to say it was grade 10 or grade 11. I actually really wanted to drop out of high school and just pursue tennis, because that's what Bjorn Borg did. And he was my idol.
Yeah.
He dropped out of high school, but I mean, that would have been stupid. And, I would, luckily I didn't do that. So I don't have to go back in time to Robin Spiers when he's 15 years old and slap him around a little bit, some sense into his head. But I mean, yeah, having a plan B is important. And again, that's one of the reasons I went through the NCAAs after high school, instead of just trying to become a professional tennis player after high school.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And because I think that's something that a lot of young athletes, again, because as you said, there are a very small percentage that actually make it to that all they ever do is play sports and then they never have to work another day in their life. But I think a lot of young athletes sometimes can get almost afraid to vocalize it and go for it, because they don't want to be ridiculed, or they don't want to be, put down because, oh yeah, there's no way, like nobody ever makes it. What makes you think you're going to? And it makes them almost afraid to really go for it. But what I'm seeing from, how you've transferred your skills as an athlete into running your own business is that focusing on all of those traits that you talked about, like even if you're focusing on them solely in a sport, the way they transfer over to real life, you're really setting yourself up for a plan B as well.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, that's a very good point. Because if you are a good competitive athlete and even, hovering between highly competitive, high performance and professional,
Yeah.
there's still lots of traits there that CEOs of large corporations or very successful salespeople or very successful business people have. And again, it is completely transferable. So you're right, doing all the things as a top athlete will prepare you, arm you with all the things you need to make it in the business world, whether it's a self-employed business owner or, someone who excels in the ranks through a corporation. So.
Yeah. And that was something that just kind of came to me as we were talking as well. I realized that, if you've transferred all these skills from your career as an athlete, then, you're able to almost transfer that to whatever you want to do after. They are pretty transferable skills when you talk about, work ethic, tenacity, the attitude of never say die. If you take all that and harness it towards an athletic career, but then you're able to take all of it and harness it towards whatever it is you decide to focus your energy on next, the chances are you're going to be pretty successful as that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Just on a side note, I want some credit for not swearing so far. I have a pretty foul mouth. I haven't said a bad word yet, I don't think. So I've been like, before we did this, I was thinking, okay, no swears, Robin. Don't be yourself and don't let a swear word come out.
Oh man, I'm not too worried if they do. I really want to make sure that what we're putting across here, right, is like, it's real. It's trying to give people a real insight into exactly what it takes, exactly who these people are that I'm interviewing. And if swear words come out, I'm not too concerned about that. You did give me one beep already, but I will give you credit for that. You did cover it up. So
yeah, I did say beep instead of what I wanted to say.
Hey, you know what? That's another way to do it for sure. And so coming from obviously a pretty successful career in real estate so far, I love what you were saying about only competing with yourself. Like if you're doing your job to the best of your ability, then you really are only competing against yourself. Because quite honestly, that's how I view individual sports almost as a whole. Yes, you have opponents. Yes, you have people you're competing against. But the second you start focusing on, what that person's doing or what that person's doing, you're getting away from what you're able to do. And if you're competing against yourself and always just trying to improve on how you're doing things, you're going to set yourself up, in my opinion, for a lot better success in the long run anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you're right. In a way, obviously you need to be aware of what other people are doing, because if you think you can make it as an athlete by putting 5 hours a week into your sport, then you're sorely mistaken. So you need to be aware of what other people are doing to the degree of, okay, what's kind of the standard right now? But then, yes, then you go back to being competitive with yourself and, take, for instance, let's say, one of the fitness testing I used to recall was the 40-yard dash, the 40, they call it, right?
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
A lot of that's the standard one for football players, but it's, for a lot of trainers, they use that because that's a fairly decent standard. So, it's not measuring anything about your muscle endurance necessarily because it's such a short sprint. It's mostly your explosive power and your speed.
Yeah.
And possibly even your technique and so on. But, taking something like that and saying, okay, well, here's the world record, that's what you should be aiming to beat.
Yeah,
and that you start off by that, but then you look back at your previous tests and say, okay, I did however many seconds. So I'm trying to beat that score, and you try and beat that every time. So I agree. You want to, maybe it's a little bit of both. You want to be at least aware of what other people are doing to the degree of, what the benchmark or the standard is. But then I think you've got to also work up to it gradually by just improving your own results and being very, very aware of your own results, as opposed to, like you say, always just comparing yourself to other people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that comes back as well to having those right coaches in place, right? So even if you don't know exactly what your opponents are doing, if your coaches know sort of what the standard is within the industry, then they're able to relay that to you and show you exactly what you need to be doing too.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. And yeah, so I think we've gotten a ton of good stuff already. Like, I really appreciate you coming on and kind of sharing your story and just some tips and tricks. And another thing I wanted to ask you about, so any athletes that are now maybe coming to the end of their career, whether it was, in their 20s kind of thinking they were going to make it and then sort of still holding on to that, or whether they're winding down, like no matter what age they're at, and they're looking to transition into the real world afterwards. Do you have any tips, any tricks, any thoughts on ways that they can take their love and their passion for what they're doing right now into the business world or into the working world after?
Well, I guess now that I'm a more mature,
we'll say mature, sure.
I know my wife wouldn't agree with that in some ways, but I think that as a father now, what I want my kids to do is, what I've told them is find something you love and you're passionate about, and don't look back. Like, especially nowadays with this new generation and, where technology is going, I don't think we're going to see people have one career. Well, even in my life, I had two careers, I guess you could say, or two or three. I suspect there won't be another career after real estate, but you never know.
Yeah.
But I would say find something that you're passionate about and make that your business, and you'll never work a day in your life. And I know somebody else said that. I don't know who said that, but I just, so all the things that you learned as an athlete, if you find something you're passionate about, who knows, maybe even if it's basket weaving, make the best baskets that are out there, and people will pay top dollar for those baskets. And that's probably the best thing I can say is be very passionate about what you're doing. Don't just do it because, if you're doing it because it puts food on the table, you're never going to do it passionately. Any athlete that is a high performance athlete or a pro athlete, that there's some days that you walk out into your arena. Like I know for a fact that there are other tennis players that had this. I would walk out onto the tennis court and I just did not feel like playing that day. Yeah. And no matter what I did to try and get myself up and win the match or have a better practice, it was just going to be one of those days. Now, obviously, those days have to be few and far between, but if anybody's going to have a bad day.
Yeah.
But I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about find something that you're passionate about, do it to the best of your ability, and you won't ever have to work a day in your life. Like, really and truly find some need out there, service or product that people need, and that you're passionate about, and that's the key. And then transfer all the things you learned about being an athlete into making that a successful business.
I love that, because I think, again, it's so true. And I say that, or some variation of that, all the time. Like, in my own career, I've been working in strength and conditioning in some capacity or another since I was 16. And it's always what I've loved to do. And again, I feel that same way of you never work a day in your life if you're doing something you love. And
and it goes when you're working with the athletes you work with. I can see it in you. So you're absolutely right. Like, it's you were very passionate about it.
Of course, I appreciate that a lot. And one thing I've always really admired about your real estate business since I've known you is just that attitude of, even if you're not a client, use our number as a hotline, and just you can see the passion in you to just help people learn, help people understand the process more, and just seem to make things as easy as possible for any clients you encounter. Can you talk a little bit about your philosophy with Robin Spiers and Associates?
Yeah, actually, this is one of the things that I was talking about earlier that didn't translate from being an athlete. So, especially being a tennis player, everything's so individual, and there. I wasn't known as like a John McEnroe, but I was definitely known as someone that, if you started something with me, I'd finish it. I didn't. Maybe because I wasn't 6'4" and the biggest person, I had to make up for it in my tenacity. But if someone was ever trying to pull stuff on the court, I wouldn't stand for it. But after tennis, so when I think of myself, one of my favorite memories as in tennis was when I was coaching. And one of the things that I discovered that I had a natural knack for was to help people. And that my ego didn't get in the way. Like, a lot of top athletes wouldn't necessarily be good at helping recreational players in that particular sport, right?
Yeah.
So one thing I noticed was I was good with kids, I was good with older people, I was good with people in general. And I actually cared and loved it. I got a huge rush when I saw the light go off in their eyes when I was teaching them something. And that's probably been the biggest transfer, or I guess surprise and realization as in my real estate career is that just came out in me. I guess I wouldn't say it came out of me because it was in me, but it wasn't fostered when I was a competitive athlete, because what am I going to go and, console my opponent for losing to me? That doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And so that part wasn't fostered. And it's funny because when I was coaching tennis, that was probably some of my best memories of tennis. Yeah, I mean, some of the tournaments I won, obviously, as a former athlete and so-called warrior, I have got some wins that I remember and everything. But some of my best memories about tennis were helping people. And so that is what's really was the surprise when I got into real estate, because again, I wasn't planning on being people's realtor. I was just getting it as an investor. And so when that happened, that was a nice surprise. And then when I got to help people out with, arguably the biggest purchase they'll ever make, help them sell their place and get top dollar, or help them buy a place and get it for a good deal. That was a new way of helping people, and help them on a much larger scale than just helping them with their forehand or their serve. So yeah, that was probably the biggest rewarding thing out of it. And that's how we operate things at Robin Spiers and Associates. No one's allowed on the team that doesn't share that philosophy of wanting to help people, or just realize the fact that we're helping people with the biggest purchase they'll ever make. So it's a huge responsibility. And if we don't do a good job for them, then what are we doing?
Yeah, and I think, funny enough, it ties me back to something we talked about much earlier, of being aware of your strengths and weaknesses as an athlete. When you talk about the thing that you realized when you started into coaching was that you were good at helping people, you had a knack for teaching and coaching. I think that's a strength you likely realize that, I don't know whether consciously or not, that you ended up bringing into real estate, because again, your philosophy of using your number as a real estate hotline, just if you have any questions or anything like that, I think just shows that you're in this business to help people more than anything else.
Yeah.
If that's a strength of yours, then it's something clearly that you've carried into what you do today as well.
Yeah, well, thank you for saying that. It's funny because one of the things that I remember when I was deciding to be a realtor versus an investor, I mean, I still invest, but it's very part-time in comparison to my business as a realtor, but was the fact that thinking about how little the general public knows about real estate, and the business. And that was one of the reasons why I started doing seminars in 2015, was one of the ways I felt that I could give back to the community. Yeah, I could donate money to, certain causes and this and that. But, one of that need's been taken care of many times over. I've seen that. But I just thought, well, here's an area that's not really being taken care of. And that's, providing information to the community. And so one of the ways is this treating our number like a real estate hotline, available to people and their friends and family. They don't need to be clients. They don't even need to be transacting. They just need to have a question, and they give us a call, and they'll get a professional on the other end, happy to answer their questions with no ulterior motive. And the other thing was the seminars, to provide, arm people with information, because information is power. And just so that, again, give them an idea of, what happens in real estate, what the processes are through the buying process, what the process is through the selling process, and arm them with the information on how that all works, or what that roadmap looks like, so that when they are in that situation, there's no surprises, or at least they're mentally prepared for it. They go in with their eyes wide open.
Yeah, I really like that. I love that philosophy, just because, again, like, I would fully include myself in that. I don't think real estate is something that all that many people have a great deal of knowledge about. So to be able to arm yourself with a realtor that's in it to educate and in it to help the clients understand, not just, make the purchase and be done with it, I think is a huge value add that you can provide to people.
Well, thanks, Kenny.
And so, Robin, I wanted to thank you again for coming on and doing all of this. And I really appreciate the time and learning more about your story. I think there's a ton of really good value here that a lot of young athletes can take away, and even a lot of young business professionals can take away as well.
Well, I hope it helps. And I appreciate you doing these videos. I mean, I think it's great hearing it from, because there's, with all the people you're probably going to be interviewing through this, some of the people out there are going to find people they can identify with. And I remember, that was critical when I was a young athlete and even young realtor, young in my business as a realtor, finding people that you can relate to and just find out what's working for them, what makes them tick, and finding parallels and go, I can do that too, because they're right in line with my philosophy. So yeah, I think this is valuable, what you're doing. So good on you.
I appreciate that a lot. And just as we leave off, if someone is looking to get a hold of you for questions with real estate or for any other reason, do you mind giving some ways that people can get in contact with you as well?
Yeah, absolutely. They can, if you see this background, there's a phone number and website plastered all over the place. So our phone number, 403-202-4798. Will get you right through to our office, and you can be connected to me or the person who's answering the phone. There's also email, info@robinspiers.com is the way you can get in touch with via email, and then of course our website is up there too at www.robinspiers.com.
All right, thank you again so much for your time, and everyone tuning in, thank you again for listening to another episode of the Elite Development Podcast.